Berachos Daf Membeis, continuing with the sugya of pasaba bekisnin, bread that comes together with kisnin, which is toasted grain. In other words, it's different type of bread. Rashi describes it as very heavy on the sweets, on nuts, very low on flour. That's why there's a mandoma that says you don't even make a birkas hamazon on it. What bracha rishayna do you make on it? According to Rabbi Yehuda, you make hamaitzi. According to Shmuel, depends. If one is kiveh suda on it, in other words, he eats 4 kibetzim of it, then he would have to make hamaitzi. In fact, in our days, if you eat any cake or whatever cookie and you eat 4 kibetzim of it, you would also have to make hamaitzi on that cake and cookies. If you're not kiveh suda, says Shmuel, then it's just a mezainis. Rabbi Yehuda was at a chasana that he made for his son, and they brought out kisnim. And he said, what's this tzitzi noise that I hear? In other words, he heard people say hamaitzi, and he wasn't happy with that. Shmuel said you could use lachmaniyot, which are kisanim, for eruv chatzeres, eruv tafshilin. And the question is, why? It's not real bread. And the answer is, if you kiveh sud on it, then it's real bread. Now, what bracha achrayna do you make on it? According to Rav Huna, you do not make a birkas hamazon. So what do you make? According to Rashi, it's a bar nefashis. According to Tosfos, it's ala michya. According to Rav Nachman, if other people establish a meal on it, then you make a birkas hamazon. The concept of hesach hadas, one decides he's no longer in a meal, even if he didn't make birkas hamazon, and they bring more food out, he has to make a new bracha. What's hesach hadas? There are 4 opinions. One opinion is once he decides the meal is over. Rav Papa says no. You have to remove all the food from the table, or actually move the table out of the way, according to another opinion. Rava was once at the Reish Golos, even though the meal was over, in his mind, he understood that the Reish Golos might bring out more food, and therefore there was no Hesach Hadas, and he didn't make a bracha on the additional food that came out afterwards. A third opinion is that if you wash your hands with oil, like you sanitize your hands, that signifies that it's the end of the meal for you. Anything that comes after that point, you have to make a new bracha. And finally, the 4th opinion, and that's the halacha, is that it's Mayim Achroinim that establishes the end of the meal. So once you wash your hands from Mayim Achroinim, then the meal is over. Even though you didn't bench, if they brought food after that point, you have to make a new bracha. The Gemara says that there are 4 tchifos. There are 4 things that must happen immediately after you do the first thing. The first one is, if you lean your hands on the animal's head, you do smicha, you must do the shchita that comes right after smicha immediately. Geula litfila, you say Gal Yisrael, you must daven Shemona Esrei immediately. When you wash your hands, Netilas Yadayim, you make a bracha immediately. And finally, Abaye says, if you invite a Talmid Chacham to your house as a guest, you will immediately have a bracha. Says the Mishnah, there are 3 times during a meal that one would drink wine in the time of the Gemara. One was before the meal started, during the appetizers. One during the meal, and that was in order to soak the food in the stomach. And the third one was after the meal, before birkas hamazon. Says the Mishnah that if you make a bracha on the wine that comes during the appetizers before the meal, that's enough to pater the wine that comes after the meal before birkas hamazon. The same thing if you make a bracha on some sort of appetizer, that's enough for the appetizers during the meal as well. And this brings us to Talmud Beis. The Gemara says that 1 cup of wine, a bracha on a cup of wine, is maitzi the 2nd cup of wine, provided that there's a kviyos suda there. In other words, it's Shabbos, it's Yontif, it's after bloodletting or after coming out of a bathhouse. But if it's during the week, 1 cup of wine has nothing to do with the other cup of wine. You would have to make a bracha on each and every cup of wine. In fact, if you're the type of person that doesn't really drink a bunch of cups of wine, you only drink 1, like Abaya, then you would have to make a bracha on Shabbos also on the 2nd cup of wine. He's nimlach. He didn't have in mind when he drank the first cup that he's actually going to have a 2nd cup, and therefore you have to make a bracha on the 2nd cup as well. The concept of making a bracha on what's the ikr, and you're mighty the tafel. So if you make a bracha on bread, you're mighty the parperes, which is like cake, a snack, but not the opposite. If you make the bracha on the parperes, you're not mighty the bread. By bread, in the time of the Gemara, when they ate the meal, like we know on the Leil Seder, they used to lean, they used to lay down on their beds, on their couches. If they were in a leaning position, then one person could be mighty everybody else. But if they're not leaning, they weren't kiveh suda, then one person cannot be mighty other people. And nowadays, Tosfos says it's different because we sit as is, we're kiveh suda by sitting, not by leaning. During the suda, when you drink wine, it's to soak the food, that has less of a chashivas than drinking wine for enjoyment. And therefore, there's a machlekes whether making a bracha on the wine that's there to soak food is a mighty, the more important one of after the meal when you're drinking for hana. When wine comes in the middle of the meal, everyone should make their own bracha. One should not be mighty other people because they're busy swallowing and they're concerned that they might choke and they won't have kavana to your bracha. If it comes after the meal, then one person makes a bracha for everybody else. In the Mishnah it says that only when they're all leaning, one can be mighty everybody else, unless they planned initially to sit down and have the meal, and that is considered as they were keveya, they decided to do so. And the Gemara says a story that after Rav was nifter, his Talmidim went to the Levaya, and they all decided, they got together and they said they're going to eat on the banks of Nahar Dank. And when they got there, they weren't sure if that's considered to establish a Suuda. And they were very sad because they had nobody to ask. They felt like the Rebbe wasn't there anymore. Reb Adav Ahava got up and he turned his shirt around. The shirt that already had Kriya on it, he flipped it around so he could perform another Kriya because he was so sad that he had nobody to ask. And the Gemara tells us that Eliyahu Navi came and he said, no, because there was a contradiction between the Mishnah and the Bryce, and we had to answer and say that the difference is when people get together and they come up with an eitzah, Rashi says, and they decide that they're going to sit down and establish a meal, that's enough to be kaveh suda, and one can be mighty everybody else. Have a wonderful day.